Kate Alexander from the University of Johannesburg. The second one is Valérie Leroux, the Concordia University, Canada. And the third one is Luis Santiago Vieira Souto, de la PUC de Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The same, 12, 13 minutes each. If large masses appear, we have a space for his presentation. Otherwise, we finish with the 3 presentations, and at the end of the 3 presentations, we have time for questions and remarks. Okay. So, Kate, the floor is yours.
Hello there. Can you see my presentation? Okay.
No yet.
Is that any better? It's on my screen without a problem. If there's a problem, I did send it to you. Can you see it yet?
No, you can open the PowerPoint in your screen, in your computer, and back to the application, to the Teams, and look for share screen. Otherwise,
I know that Camilo has had a copy of the presentation, and I think he sent it to you. And I've been pushing the share button, but without any luck.
Okay, let me see. Now?
Yeah, that'll do.
Okay, so I need that you indicate me how to pass one diapo to the next one, okay?
Right, okay. Right, okay, so you can see the title of the presentation. Can you, okay, I haven't got control. So can you pass to the next slide, please?
Okay. Sorry.
Next slide. Can you hear me?
No? Yes.
Can I have the next slide?
Yeah, I am in the third slide, the fourth one.
I'm afraid I can't see it at all. I don't know if other people can. What are other people seeing at their end? All I've got at my end is still
slide, only the first slide.
Yeah.
We don't see the rest. I mean,
can you see the second slide yet?
No.
Right.
Sorry, Benjamin. Can I just jump in and just do the presentation, like share my screen and help Kate?
Okay. Go ahead.
Let me just see if I can. Is that better?
I can see the first slide. Can you take me to the second slide?
Yeah.
Okay, that's lovely. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to talk about the Community Organising Working Group, which was the subject of the presentation by Angela Chukwunzira. But I want to place it within the context of South Africa's increasingly weak state, and do that in order that we begin to look towards the future of social movements in the working class, specifically in South Africa, but more generally in a post-pandemic world. And in that way, tie this presentation to the theme of the conference. I'm speaking about South Africa, but I think some of the things I have to say are more broadly relevant. And as Donatella put it in her introduction, we're dealing now with declining state capacity in a large number of different countries. Next slide, please. Okay, I don't want to say too much about the weak state. It's generally accepted in South Africa, at least, that that's what we're having to deal with now. Let me just give one example, and it comes from this time last year, July 2021. After the arrest and imprisonment of Jacob Zuma, the former president, there was organized sabotage which sparked spontaneous unrest, leading to 354 deaths, 200 shopping centers ransacked, and a loss of $3.5 billion. The police were mere spectators in most cases I was most shocked by this, because normally when you see looting, you also see police shooting at people. That's not what happened here at all. It was mass looting and large amounts taken from the shop. Now, the weak state is then connected very closely with the very high level of inequality in South Africa. I'm sure most people know that South Africa has the highest Gini coefficient in the world. The level of unemployment now, the official rate of unemployment is now 34.5% in South Africa, meaning that although there's a tiny proportion of very wealthy people at the top who are protected to a large extent from the problems in society, there's this massive number of people who are very poor. And the situation is getting worse with the general economic climate around the world. Next slide, please. Right, in this nice colourful table, you'll see South Africa compared with other countries in terms of levels of vaccination. And you can see there that this is of pretty much now, maybe last week, only 37% of South Africa's total population had had one shot of vaccine. And you can see some comparators there. Even Zimbabwe, a much, much poorer country than South Africa, and with a lower mean age, the level of vaccination was at 42%. So higher still than South Africa. And there are other figures there for India, Brazil, and so on. Shabir Mahdi, the country's top virologist, argues that there are now 300,000 people who have died of COVID, and at least half of those could have been saved had the rollout not been such a disaster. In terms of inequality, if one looks at the official data, when it was just people above 60 who were being vaccinated, 48% of those with medical insurance had been vaccinated, and only 26% of those without medical insurance. And if one looks at the proportion of people in the Western Cape, adults in the Western Cape who'd been vaccinated, and we multiplied that up and we extended it to the rest of the country, we would easily have got to a figure of 70% vaccinated, 70% of adults vaccinated, which is what the government was aiming at. Next slide, please. So this is a little graph which shows the level of protests in South Africa. South Africa has more protests than any other country in Africa. It reached a peak in 2019, went up in 2020, and went up even more in 2020-21. The problem we face is that the key civil society organisations, the key social movements, the trade unions, have not been able to respond to that. And indeed, their response to the COVID pandemic generally has been very, very weak indeed. Problems also with churches and with most of the more established civil society organisations. But there is one organisation that stands out as having done, as having responded rather effectively. Some other smaller ones around the country, but it's that one that I want to talk about. Next slide, please. And of course, this is the Community Organising Working Group. One of the key things for me is that the organisation is based around team leaders who all have a base, they're all leaders in their own communities and come together in a coordinated fashion to determine certain activities. Critically at the beginning, the question of popular education, food, but then later on all sorts of other issues, xenophobia, gender-based violence and so forth. Next please. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide, back one, please. That's it, lovely. Okay, so that graph is showing us the number of vaccinations per week in South Africa. And you can see that the mass vaccinations started on the 17th of May. I mean, before that, there were nurses and so on being vaccinated, but that's when you start getting people above 60 vaccinated. And there's a peak at the end of August 2021. And you can see the way in which it's really died down now. And so we're now down to about 20,000 vaccinations per week, tiny number. Now, what we did as researchers, working together with the Community Organising Working Group, which I've been part of from the very beginning, which is sometimes why I talk about we began this project of rapid response community intervention research. And in that first couple of weeks, in one of the informal settlements, we very, very quickly discovered that the reason why many people couldn't be vaccinated was they couldn't get to the vaccination site. Nothing to do with hesitancy and everything to do with access. And there's a photograph there of a woman of 100 And when we provided her with transport, she got to the vaccination site, no problem, and then persuaded other people to go as well. We publicised this through a report, and 2 days later, the acting Minister of Health, who had picked up on the report, spoke about the need to get vaccines to the people, which became a mantra for the Department of Health. So we were having an impact. Unfortunately, the government didn't do what it said it was going to do, and the level of deaths increased dramatically under the third wave in South Africa. We continued to undertake research elsewhere, ran a week of action, which highlighted once again the failure of the government to deal with the problem of access. You'll see a photograph there, top right-hand corner, of a very large mobilisation we organised at a point where it was relatively easy to get people vaccinated. 700 people wanting to be vaccinated at a site which we had mobilised for. But then after that, it became tougher. But in the last couple of months, we've been working with a movement called Zwakala, funded by UNICEF, and it's that I want to turn to in the next few slides. Next slide, please. Right, so here we have it, 46 activations, all lasted about 5 days, all involving about 11 members, and the last 2 of those days involved vaccination. So we were undertaking the mobilisation for those sites, and we based our strategy on the research which had been conducted by academics, including myself, which had highlighted these various problems of access, and we also drew on our experience of social movements and indeed of social movement studies. So you'll see in those photographs a range of different tactics that were being deployed in order to increase the number of people coming for vaccinations. And it worked pretty well. The Department of Health loved us and so on. Let's have a look at the next slide, please. So this is just details from a couple of quick surveys to show who we were relating to. Mostly people in informal settlements, people living in shacks, in what in South Africa people refer to as zinc shacks. The figures there for smartphones are particularly interesting because the government has been trying to communicate with people through smartphones. But you'll see there that although a high proportion of both the people vaccinated and of our mobilisers owned smartphones, or certainly had access to smartphones, a much smaller proportion could make use of them at all times. They couldn't afford the cost of data. That was a big problem that exists in South Africa. So in practice, the government's method of communicating with the public was a failure, at least as far as poor people were concerned. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of this vaccination mobilisation for the community organising working group as a social movement? Let me run through these points. First, it expanded our footprint to about 40 communities, mostly informal settlements in South Africa's largest city. We developed a coherent leadership capable of benefiting from differences of opinion while also able to exclude individuals whose behaviour was unacceptable. We were able to recruit and train new cadres, deepening capacity to provide community leadership. We learned to explain complex science to people who were often poorly educated. We embraced innovation. We've had the example of Zoom discussed earlier, and we've developed this novel team-based approach to mobilisation. And I've given a number of other examples there, but I want to move to the conclusion because of the limitations of time. So let's have a look at the next slide, please. Okay, so here are the lessons. This is my penultimate slide. Here are some lessons that I've been drawing from this mobilisation in the context of a disintegrating state. The first point that I make here is that there will be continuing unrest, especially in poor working class communities. Unless this is harnessed, organised and coordinated, it will be frittered away with occasional victories clawed back by a desperate state. On the other hand, building cohesive community organisation can create the basis for a powerful new working class movement. The second point that I make, though, is that as the state withdraws from its societal responsibilities, which can happen for various reasons, it begins to leave a vacuum. Different forces are drawn in, including gangsters, privatised entities that help those who can afford their services, big capital attempting to shore up a compliant state, sometimes through NGOs, and local activists capable of mobilizing to provide some social services, basic relief, and a measure of order. And there's no doubt that by taking vaccines to the people, CAUG was mobilizing resources, people and funds to provide a social service. Now, linking those first two lessons, 1 and 2, we can see that there's a problem here, or there can be a problem here, because these two can pull in different directions, protesting and providing. It means working with angry youth over protests and with respectable representatives of money over providing. And this can incur the wrath of both. On the other hand, simply doing nothing leaves us impoverished, and simply doing the second one leaves us co-opted. Nevertheless, in the present situation of this weakening state, it may be possible to walk on both legs, garnering resources from both the processes rather than hopping into oblivion on one. And now my last slide, please. Okay, what about the wider significance of what I'm presenting here? Well, CAUG became a significant social movement in South Africa, but the state's political weakness limited its achievements. Nevertheless, it showed what was possible. And I think this is true for other countries as well, not just South Africa. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we published an op-ed calling for the government to set up auxiliaries of community activists. And they didn't listen to us, they rejected it to start with, but eventually they came on board. So over a period of time, we were able to press the government to work with social movement activists, but really it was too late in terms of having a major impact in terms of vaccinations and in terms of saving lives. For social movements, a two-track approach allows working class communities to fill gaps created by a retreating state and save lives in the process. This is not an argument, I want to make it clear, for do-it-yourself reformism or prefigurative socialism. Class contradictions remain and revolutions are still required to destroy capitalist states. And finally, by filling gaps, community organizations, social movements can expand their influence, they can develop confidence amongst their activists, they can build networks and organizations, and thus enhance the possibility that an effective revolutionary movement will arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, for the presentation. And now we will move to the presentation of Valerie. Valerie?
Yes, I just sent my presentation also to Camilo if he wants to manage my diapo.
Yeah, let me see.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, Valerie, it's a PDF, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
it was asked to produce PDF, so
Okay.
I'm obeying the law. Okay, so that's perfect.
I think, Benjamin, you are... Yeah, you're showing your screen, right? Okay, cool.
Can you see it? Yeah?
Yes, it's perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so indicate when you want to pass the slide.
Yes, I will tell you to move to the next slide when it's going to be the time. So first, hi, everyone. So my presentation today is broadly on the post-pandemic framing possibilities for the global left by analyzing and documenting the work done by Progressive International, which is a new transnational organization that attempts to unite, mobilize, and organize the convergence of diverse struggles worldwide. It also gathers the cosmopolitan elite of the internationalist left, so among which Gustavo Petro, Noam Chomsky, Naomi Klein, Yanis Varoufakis, Rafael Correa, and many others. So I will first start by introducing briefly Progressive International. Then I'll develop on some concept essential to my analytical framework. And finally, I'll present the result in the case of Progressive International, mostly around the issue of vaccine internationalism. So next slide, please, Benjamin. Thank you. So the context of the pandemic and the associated exacerbation of many crises and inequalities have made more urgent the call for a convergence of the global left. So that is the premise. In this presentation, I intend to highlight the attempt at bridge framing done by PI around public health, social inequality, and climate justice in the current world system configuration by frontally attacking what they call the vaccine apartheid. So framing is a major strategic and tactical component for social movement organizations based on interpretation of issues, events, and conjunctures that stimulate and legitimize collective action. Therefore, I seek to analyze progressive international specific grammar to identify injustices, attribute responsibilities, suggest alternative solutions, and foster transnational coalition. So I did a basic discourse analysis based on documents generated by Progressive International COVID-19 Response Working Group, as well as on public interventions made during the Vaccine Internationalism Summit in June 2021. I will talk about that more later. So this is a working paper, so I'll be happy to hear more about your comments after that. I think that analyzing the framing done by such an organization may participate in determining whether the contemporary global left is working right now on the creation of a new master frame, or if we are observing a less ambitious attempt at frame bridging between global public health, climate justice, and solidarity. So next slide, please. So before delving into all those analyses, let's move to my case study, Progressive International. I will present it briefly. So it originated in a call by Democracy in Europe Movement 2025, so DM25, and the Sanders Institute at a meeting in Vermont in 2018. And a couple of years later, it was formally converted from a movement to an organization. So almost at the start of the pandemic, it was in May. It seeks to counter crisis capitalism and the global rise of authoritarian nationalism with a strategic focus on an international Green New Deal. Its slogan, internationalism or extinction, sets the tone for this global initiative. So Progressive International divides its activities into three main components. First, it aims at building an international network of progressive activists and organizers. Second, to elaborate a shared vision of a fairer world. And thirdly, to build a platform for publishing critical perspective from the field. Lastly, in regard to its structure, PI is a formal organization with a permanent secretariat, a cabinet acting as an executive body, and a council of advisors responsible for setting the strategic direction. That's where the cosmopolitan elite of the global left is. So next slide, please. So I'm interested in the framing possibilities for the global left following the pandemic. So let's just define briefly this notion. I understand it as a combination of a neo-Gramscian approach and the world system perspectives. So I personally use the concise definition offered by Chase, Dunn, and Almeida, who refer to this new global left as a subgroup of global civil society that is critical of neoliberal and capitalist globalization, corporate capitalism, and the exploitative and undemocratic structures of global governance. So it's still a huge group of people. About framing analysis, it was developed by social constructivists to analyze what makes an idea persuasive to different audiences. So frames as symbolic politics are ways of packaging and presenting ideas, not just ideas per se, and they tend to generate shared belief, motivate collective action, and define strategies and action. So the resonance depends on whether they attend to the three core framing tasks, diagnostic, prognostic, and motivational framing, as developed by Snow and Benford in 1988. So those are the concepts I will use later in in the analysis. So briefly, diagnostic framing entails the diagnosis of some event or current situation perceived as problematic, as well as the attribution of responsibility for the situation. Prognostic framing implies the articulation of a proposed solution to the problem, including a plan of attack and the frame consistent tactics for carrying it out. And finally, motivational framings involves the elaboration of a call of action. It's kind of the agency component of collective action frame. So next slide, please. So let's start our analysis by the task of a diagnostic framing. So Progressive International has criticized the global failure to put people first and focus on collective well-being in government and corporate responses to the pandemic. While the virus itself may not discriminate, they say, our global economic system does, and the impact of the pandemic has fallen unevenly along gender, race, and class lines across the world. The crisis has blown up the myth of private health, that our health is largely the results of individual choices and personal responsibilities. And our health cannot be separated from the health of others or our planet, nor from the structural factors and policy decisions in the past and now. Yet the dominant response by governments around the world has been to hoard supplies, blockade, and advance deals with pharmaceutical companies to purchase vaccines. International institutions, meanwhile, were incapable of coordinating an effective response to the health and economic emergencies that resulted from the COVID-19 outbreak. And following Progressive International analysis, the entire architecture of the international system is also to blame, as well as the action of philanthrocapitalism and of US imperialism. Finally, the diagnosis that the pandemic intersects, amplify, and accelerates the climate crisis. So they really try to bridge those two frames. Next slide, please. So let's move to the challenge of prognostic framing. Since its inception, Progressive International has put forward the issue of vaccine internationalism as a potential collective action frame. So first, the COVID-19 response working group convenes academics, activists, and community organizers to develop response to COVID-19 that, again, put people first by rethinking health and safety, trade and finance, and labor and social policy. It seeks to explore alternatives to prevent a new shock doctrine and to implement a new paradigm of care, prosperity, solidarity, and public health across borders. So their discourse turns around the fact that public health is primary healthcare strengthening, so pro-public patent regimes and affordable access to medicines. Another critical aspect of their plan of attack that I was surprised to find in the document regarding the pandemic is preparing the ground to launch a coordinated global Green New Deal to stimulate the economic recovery within sustainable environmental limits, as well as decolonizing the global economic architecture. So this solution is really included in the package of solutions bundled together by PI and can be indicative again of frame bridging done here. Second, another strategy deployed by Progressive International was to convene, I said it before, a global summit on vaccine internationalism that lasted 4 days in June 2021, and really focusing their message on decrying the inequalities in the worldwide distribution and access to COVID-19 vaccine and trying to establish a common plan of action. So during the event, they brought together political leaders from over 20 countries, mostly from the global south, healthcare workers, public health experts, and even some vaccine manufacturers. 5 commitments were made at the closing ceremony. So open collaboration over vaccine technologies, solidarity prices for vaccines, sharing of regulatory capacity to approve them for domestic use, pooling manufacturing capacity to ramp up production, and finally, collective disobedience to challenge the big pharma monopoly. Next slide, please. So finally here, the discussion of the task of motivational framing. So as shown in previous scholarship, before collective action is likely to occur, a critical mass of people must socially construct a sense of injustice and a will to act collectively to change the situation. So motivational framing thus involves, among other things, the construction of vocabularies of motive, providing incentives for action by emphasizing the seriousness of the issue, the urgency of acting now, and the likely efficacy of joining others in collective action. So concerning the latter, Progressive International uses a language of rights, inclusion, and internationalism. PI's discourse on COVID-19 focuses on the urgent and enduring need for international coordination, cooperation, and solidarity. On the fact that no country can end the pandemic alone. The pandemic has opened a window of opportunity to revisit and reevaluate the many myths that held up a broken global health system. And in doing so, it offers the chance to deliver what they call a truly global public health system. Progressive International furthermore emphasizes the emergency of starting a profound transformation of our current economic world system to one that by design fosters a community, democracy, sustainability, health, and well-being. Those are all words that are often present in the documents done by PI. So the action we take now or fail to take could have profound long-term consequences. We must not allow this crisis to further entrench a political economic world order fed by the destruction. I was not there yet, but no problem. By the destruction of people and planet, and must instead create a more equitable, inclusive, and people-centered world. So a withering critique of capitalism is not enough if we read the discourse of Progressive International. The world really has to come to prioritize human life and environmental sustainability, both, and also the promotion of universal right to health as a basis for all public policy. So those are the main discursive elements of the motivation framing undertaken by PI around vaccine internationalism. So now my conclusion. To conclude, following a descriptive analysis of progressive international works at diagnostic, prognostic, and motivational framings, the demonstration of those very preliminary results suggests that it seeks to mobilize its adherent and pressure political targets to adhere to the general idea of vaccine internationalism, as opposed to vaccine apartheid, to put people first and their well-being over private profits, and by making health a public good. So at the theoretical level, the framing analysis of Progressive International around the pandemic provides, I think, a relevant perspective for better understanding the creation of meanings and framings by organizations from the nascent or current global left. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie, for the presentation. One moment. Okay. And okay, the next speaker would be Luisa Santiago Vieira Soto.
Hi, I'm here.
Do you have any PowerPoint
Thank you very much.
presentation or?
Yes, I'm gonna try it. If I can't, Camilo has it. So let me see.
Yeah, Luis, I will provide assistance if.
Okay, thank you.
Here we are. Yeah, 2
I
seconds.
think I can.
If you cannot share your screen, just let me know and I will happily assist.
Try. I guess it's gonna work. Is it all? No. I think you can, if you can do it, Camilo, for me, please. I think it's gonna take a while to charge here.
Yes, Lisa is ready, I think.
Okay.
I'm gonna stop it. Thank you. So, thank you, Camilo. I'm Luisa. I'm from Brazil. I'm a PhD candidate, and first of all, I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity. This presentation is part of my PhD research that I am doing in the University Catholic de Louvain, and also in the Pontifical University Catholic of Rio de Janeiro. And my research, as I believe the work of many of you have been, and I've seen here during all this day, was cross the fact and challenged by the pandemic. And we don't study any infectious disease, but I do study the practice of solidarity in the daily life of a homeless movement in Brazil. And the solidarity became central in this moment. So this presentation is an effort to think about what happened in this microsphere, because I'm going to bring it just a little bit to a smaller sphere right now, but I think it has connections with what happened in a lot of other places, and considering everything that I heard during all this day here. I'm going to give you a brief context, so if you can pass, Camilo, please. Another one, please. About the movement. Can you pass one more, please? Sorry.
This one or the next one?
The next one. Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. The reaction? Yeah.
No, it's not there. Sorry. Please just come back for the Brazil. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the movement. I studied the homeless workers movement in Brazil. It's a movement that is organized in kind of 11 states of the country, and organized with people to fight for the right for decent housing. And it's made mostly by women, single mothers, Black people, informal workers, poor people that are unemployed. And it's placed in the peripheral areas of the city and was created in 1997. This is the movement that I study in my PhD research. So if you can please just come back for the Brazil, the first one. Sorry about that. Just to situate you guys from where I'm coming from. Talking about Brazil and the pandemic in Brazil, as well as other countries, Brazil was a great example that the idea that infectious disease do not recognize social classes or other barriers is a big myth, as David Harvey pointed back in 2020. The reality showed us that it affected more some groups than the others. We can talk about a class, gender, and race pandemic because there is a class, gender, and race cut in the social profile of those who are more vulnerable to it, and of those who can't stop working because they are responsible for care or other basic services, or because they work in informality, and if they don't work, they don't have money to live. In general, the situation of poverty increased in Brazil, especially if we consider the hunger dimension. The last research that was published here showed that there are more than 33 million Brazilians experiencing hunger right now. The actions from the government to face the situation were insufficient, as we heard here about many other countries. And the social inequalities that Brazil already had gotten even worse. It affected the life of a large part of the Brazilian society, and the militants of the movement that I studied are included in this. But even though they were experimenting the problems in their lives and feeling in their bodies, as an organized social movement, they had responsibilities and they had to react. If you can pass, please. One more, please. While a large part of the world was put on hold because we had to stop and we had to isolate ourselves, social movements that organize the population that live in peripheral areas had to reorganize themselves and act fast. I'm going to talk about the reaction of this movement in two dimensions. The first one responded to immediate needs. The second can be considered in the long term. Based on the principle of solidarity that my PhD research points as a highlight of the activism of this movement, they organize numerous actions to fight those problems through this principle of solidarity. And those actions included helping people beyond the frontiers of the movement, direct and quick actions to help people that are part of the movement, but also that live around the areas where they are. They had to refrain, they had to adapt and expand their repertoire of action. They started right away by organizing campaigns to gather money to buy food and cleaning supplies and distributed to people that needed. I think I have a picture in the next slide. Then they asked, yes, the first one. Then they asked for health and other professionals to create materials to help people to know how to protect themselves from the virus. They organized groups to make face masks to distribute that after were distributed for free for people. Also because there are a lot of informal workers that are part of the movement and in Brazilian peripheries in general that lost their job during pandemic and had no income. They create a way to offer their service with an app by telephone and to facilitate the contact. And the biggest action was the next slide, please, Camilo. The solidarity kitchens that the movement built in more than 36 places around the country to distribute food and meals. This is a practice. The collectivity kitchens are something that is common in the daily life of the movement, but with the pandemic scenario, they decided to put it outside also. And this is an image of one of those kitchens offering free lunch, and the campaign to calling people to be part of to contribute and to be part of the supply network that helps the kitchens to exist. This was not easy. It took a lot of work and energy and organization to happen. And I defend they were able to do this so fast because of the necessity, obviously, but also because of the experience that they already had from their daily activism, from their lives. And the next one, please. The second dimension was a little bit bigger challenge. Please, the next one. Because it is a big challenge because we are not over yet. And as Geoffrey points out, considering the battlefield that the pandemic is, there is no easy path from it to a different world. So in addition to those directed actions, I observe another dimension of reaction of the movement, that is the effort to battle for the meaning of the pandemic crisis. An effort that is also a battle in the pedagogical task, especially in Brazil, where the official narrative tended to be a little different from the reality. So while the movement had to be quickly and creatively to respond to the humanitarian emergency and questions that were there, they also had to engage in an interpretative struggle about the narrative of the pandemic crisis and try to make people realize what was really going on and why it affected their lives the way it did. I divided this movement's effort, in 4 levels that include both struggling and the pedagogic dimensions. The first one required to talk about is the real dimensions of the health problem. It required to talk about the real gravity of the health issue, because the Brazilian government started by denying it, and what made it harder to make population in general understand that they had to take care of themselves, they had to take care of the others that were close, that this was a serious risk, health risk, that they had to take the vaccines and they wouldn't turn into an alligator, as the president said. The second is about the roots of the social crisis. Was an effort to talk about this and show that the situation that we are right now is that bad also because of previous political decisions, previous political choice. It's necessary to make the relations of the current situation with politics and decisions made before that. Like, for example, the labor reform that increased informality and the work between the workers, and what left them in this situation without any kind of social security. So if they had to stop working, they had no income, they had no nothing to provide for their lives. In a bigger perspective, we can even consider necessary to situate this as a consequence generated because of the capitalist development. Things are not possible to be dissociated.
5 minutes.
The other
5 minutes.
Okay. The other one is the insufficient response from the state. The movement had to try to expose this insufficient response and show how they acted in the wrong way to get the vaccines, for example, and how the social politics that were proposed were not enough to diminish the social effects of the pandemic. And last, the urgency to fight was an opportunity to talk with the population in general about the importance of popular organization to achieve social change. The urgency, the ways to fight, to find the ways to fight for social change. If you can pass, please, Benjamin. The tactics adopted to do that were several, like by talking with people during solidarity acts or doing activities. But you can go passing those photos, Camila, please. By doing activities and debates with the population, doing protests in symbolical places. As you will be able to see, there is a picture of a protest in the stock market. They also created slogans for their campaigns that reinforced that they were acting where the government was not. And I don't know, you probably saw it, but it was like social movements doing what the government don't do. Social network was fundamental in this process because it increased the possibility to spread it fast, but they also invested in printed materials, as you can see in this photo. While they were giving food and supplies to a person, they also distributed papers, flyers, explaining the situation and to set a debate about it. This is necessary because the movement can turn these immediate actions into something more. And when we think from a perspective of a social movement that has a larger as a larger object to promote social change and achieve social justice, it's not enough to do the direct immediate actions, although they are indispensable. Part of the role of the social movement is to debate publicly the narrative about what's going on and where we are going after, to try to mobilize the society around it. We largely discuss in social movement studies that the existence of a situation of injustice, violence, or disrespect is not enough to engage people in action against it. So it's also necessary to fight an interpretative battle to achieve effective the public dimension of it and make people realize the situation by understanding the roots of it, why it's affecting their lives, and visualize ways to act it. The challenge for the social movement in this post-pandemic world that we are going to be someday, that I pose here is to win this battle, this narrative struggle, is to be able to get out of this crisis not only alive, but stronger as a social movement, with more ties with the population in general and more strength to move towards its goal that is social change. A challenge that in some way can also be faced as an opportunity. The pandemic has the possibility to turn into more movements for social change, but it depends on how we deal with this. And this is how the homeless social movements from Brazil is dealing with this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luisa, for the presentation. And now we have some time for questions and demands. Well, you can write in the chat one comment for the 3 presentation of Livia. Unfortunately, she has to leave, but the comment is there. You can have a look about the 3 presentation. And for the rest of the attendance, if you have any questions, any demand, Toba?
My question is addressed to Luisa, and I have looked with great interest at the pictures that you have presented, because I always also love to bring pictures to show the spirit of the event. And I realized that most of your pictures, if not all of them, have a very dominant appearance of women. Now, my question is whether this movement has a very, very large proportion of women, perhaps larger than men, and if that has any consequences on the activities and strategies of the women. And I'm asking this because right now I am involved in studying the Resolution 1325 of the United Nations Security Council concerning women in war zones. And in effect, food crisis can be considered being in a very sort of difficult zone, and some of the activities are very similar to activities of women's movements who are trying to bring to the implementation of 1325.
Should I answer now or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well.
Thank you, Tova. Yes, yeah, you noted right. The pictures mostly shows women, and this is an aspect of this movement. This is an aspect of housing movements in Brazil in general. The massive presence of women between the militants. This movement has a large presence of women. They are mostly women building the daily life of the movement. And what they say is that they make this connection between the actions and the fact that is a most feminine movement, because those are the women are the ones who feel more the necessity to care historically for all historical reasons that we know, why it's up to them to care of the family, to worry about the food. So they make this this connection between the practices that they do, and they are doing, and they do it in the daily life, and the existence of a majority of women in the basis of the movement. But there are also a lot of men involved. So it's a conclusion that we have to take. It's something that I'm doing in my research. It's a question that I put myself, if this is determinant for the way they act.
Okay. Any question? Any comment? I have a question for Kate and for Valerie. According to your information, you consider that the role of the state, the role that the states play in the pandemic times, reinforce the international tendency to a health service guarantee for all, or reinforce the difference between different countries according to the capability of invest research and vaccine the population?
Okay, do you want to go first?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, there's also a question on the chat for me about community organizers. I don't think there's anything new about that in South Africa, and I think it's partly because of the nature of apartheid, where poorer people, black people, were segregated from better off, mainly white people. So the working class was separated, and the communities, neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, became a space where it's possible to organize effectively. Mostly unemployed people, some workers, some petty bourgeois, but those became key centers for mobilization, and they are still today. The question of the National Health Service, well, it's supposed to be on the agenda in South Africa. The government is still in favor of developing a national health service, but in reality, nothing's happening, and nothing's happening because the economy is weaker and the government has got priorities elsewhere. And as you've seen, the state in general is very weak. It's not capable even of making sure that people get vaccinated. And that's not just because of some international apartheid. It's just because of incompetence and weakness within the South African government. So I think that during the pandemic, unfortunately, we've gone backwards in terms of developing a genuine national health service. And there is this big gap between people who have medical aid, they get access to private hospitals, private health treatment, and who don't do too badly. I mean, the hospitals in South Africa the private hospitals are as good as those in somewhere like Britain, which I know fairly well. That's not the case in the public hospitals, where the conditions can be appalling and where it's very difficult to get served. The number of people who have got medical insurance is about 14% at the moment. Went up slightly, very slightly during the pandemic, and now it's gone down again because even the middle classes are suffering from the economic decline. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. And in your case, Valerie, I mean, there is a tendency to internationalization of the health as a general service for humanity, or
Yeah.
doesn't?
Thank you for your question. I think in progressive international discourses, the role the state played or didn't play during the pandemic reinforced nationalistic tendency, but at the same time, the pandemic and the failure from government to act give potential for transnationalizing social movements and some claims. So I think it goes in both directions.
Okay.
I give short answers, sorry.
Makes up for me.
No.
Well, in any case, in the three cases that you present in this session, it's clear that the pandemic reinforced the role of community, the people closer to the person affected by the pandemic, or the social and economical condition that create for the pandemic. Well, it's in general, I mean, has been, we have observed a strong mobilization of people in almost in Spain and in other countries, no, defending the national health services and supporting the nurses, supporting the doctors, and supporting the health of the population. Yeah, but it's probably in other countries the experience has been quite different. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, look, there's an interesting point there from a South African perspective. I mean, we did try in CALG to kind of get people applauding nurses and so forth, and it really didn't take off. And one of the things that we've been finding in organising vaccinations ourselves is that people often come to the sites and they say, we'll come to your site because we don't like the nurses, we don't like the public sites. So the nurses are not necessarily popular in South Africa. Some are, some aren't, but many aren't. And I think that's because of a certain kind of snootiness, a kind of way in which nurses can look down on poorer people. And that has a long history to it. You know, under apartheid, there were very few people considered middle class amongst black people. Nurses were one of them. So there was a certain kind of class identity which distinguished nurses from other people in the black communities.
There is a hand up, but I can't see which is the person. I can see.
Sorry, it's me. It's Angela.
Okay, Angela, go ahead. Sorry.
But I think my question has somehow been swallowed by all the responses and the comments that have come of late. But my question goes to Kate and probably Valerie. It's about when South Africa had a good way of, it's to do with communications. The South African government had a good way of communicating the vaccine, and yet the uptake was low. And then in the beginning of the session, the earlier on sessions, there was like the pandemic being a battlefield. So there's a rise in anti-vax movement. And at the same time, there is also like social movements that are coming up for vaccine equality. So, and this is linked to the failure of the state. Yet I'm seeing the state made some effort to advertise the vaccine as something that is good. The president himself taking a jab, and that being advertised on TV and other traditional media. So what's your take on this? Is it still part of the philanthrocapitalism, as Valerie put it? Thank you.
Shall I respond? Or does Valerie want to come in first?
Oh, okay. Well, I just want to say that I study philanthrocapitalism with the action of the MasterCard Foundation in Africa. And every time they can use a crisis to do a shock doctrine, they do it. But I think it's not that governments don't do anything, but like they do it for their own population. And there's still a lot of vaccine nationalism. So for Progressive International, it's really to go over the borders and to deconstruct the production and distribution process of vaccines and medical equipment. So yeah, that would be my answer.
I think Angela's question in some way relates to one that I posed in an earlier session. And Camilla, I don't know if it's possible to do it very quickly, but if you can go to my fourth slide, that might open up some discussion around these issues. That's a slide which provided us with a comparison between different countries in terms of levels of vaccination. And I think it does raise questions. I don't have the answers at all. But to what extent are high vaccination rates related to having strong...
Is this one, right? Sorry, Kate.
Yeah,
it's this one.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, number before that, just before that. That's the one, lovely. Okay, and we have Brazilian commentators here. They're probably Indians online as well. So why do we have this big range then in terms of levels of vaccination? You know, I can see why South Africa is so low, despite the fact that the government and president were pro-vaccine. Angela mentions the question of communication. It's been absolutely appalling in South Africa. The Minister of Health has been implicated in corruption, which costs a very large amount of money and undermined the communications drive by the government. But a lot of it, in order to keep things cheap, has been based upon digital marketing. And the whole process has been one which is concerned with seeing the rollout in marketing terms. It's about demand generation. It's not about it being a social activity. There's been no social mobilization, very little mobilization in indigenous languages, nearly all of it in English, very little on television, despite the fact that in our research we've shown conclusively that television is the main source of information that people have got about vaccines. Radio comes second. Again, government doing very little in terms of radio. So the communications approach of the South African government has been abysmal, as well as these other issues that I raised earlier about access to vaccination sites. So I would love to hear from the comrades from Brazil how they think things were done so successfully in Brazil, despite the opposition of the president.
Hi. Hello. Yeah, we have kind of a vaccine culture here in Brazil. We are used to get a lot of vaccines since we are born. So public health systems. So I think despite of that, the campaigns and the previous experiences led people to vaccinate themselves. I think it's kind of a stronger previous culture that we have here related to other vaccines that was able to make a large number of people go to vaccinate themselves despite of the alligator challenge threat. Sorry, Kate.
I should make a new hand. Can I continue, Benjamin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that's enough of an explanation. I'm not sure that we're going to get an explanation today, and I think it's very, very complicated, and there'll have to be lots of research. But there's also a vaccine culture in South Africa. You know, everybody gets vaccinated for all sorts of different things. So that on its own seems to me to be inadequate. I think, as I understand the situation in Zimbabwe, there are local clinics which are quite close to where people live, and there's a strong relationship between people and their local clinics. And the rollout was conducted mostly through those very local clinics, whereas in South Africa, there were special vaccination sites that were set up, and they were often more distant and unfamiliar to people. I don't know whether that's an additional factor. I mean, in a way, I'm posing a question here to you, Luisa. I mean, how was what were the practicalities, the mechanics of the rollout process in Brazil, and how was the communications conducted?
We have the federal government, but the federalist system, well, the local governments also have a lot of power to talk directly with the population. So despite of the campaign made, not an official campaign, but the narrative adopted by the federal government, the local place in the local spheres, the states, things were different. Most of the governors and mayors treated the situation in a different way. So they conducted their own campaigns to stimulate people to go vaccinate. So it's really divided here, and the states and the councils, they have autonomy to do their own campaigns, to do their own efforts to stimulate people to go to look for the vaccine. Once they have vaccine, sometimes they didn't because it didn't arrive from the federal government, but when they had, they could do this, most of them. Your microphone, Benjamin.
Sorry. Thank you very much to the three presentation for the presenters, for the presentation, and also to the rest of participants. And I think that if you are agree, Camilo, it's time to close the session of today. And remember that tomorrow we have four more or 6 more sessions. So thank you very much, and it was my pleasure to know you and hear you and share with you your comments and your research. Okay, thank you very much.
So thank you, Benjamin, for sharing the session, and just trying to echo in some of your words. And thank you everyone for this first day. It was really good. I really enjoyed all presentations, and hopefully I will see you tomorrow. We're starting at 8:45, so 15 minutes to 9 a.m. to our second keynote address, and we're having sessions 6, 7, 8, and 9. We have 4 more sessions tomorrow. So thank you so much once again. Have a good rest and see you tomorrow. And thank you for making this conference really good at the moment. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye.